As a nation, we're obsessed with our royal family and love nothing more than hearing all about scandals at the palace. There's plenty of them, new tonight at 9. And our night in their company begins now at Windsor Castle with love, war and celebration.
Delivering a professional job right across our wonderful nation. Crown Decorating Centres sponsor Great British Stories.
Windsor, the oldest and largest continually inhabited castle in the world. For 1,000 years, it's been the symbol of Britain's royal dynasties. For the Queen, this is a palace like no other.
The Windsor Castle is her home. It is a family home as well. And she feels very comfortable there.
1,000 rooms, hundreds of staff, billions of pounds worth of paintings and fine furnishings, 5,000 acres of parkland.
It's a great stage on which the whole royal business can be acted out.
It's also where the royal family hide their secrets.
There are documents and letters there that I think probably every historian would give their eye teeth for.
It's been the Queen's home for 80 years. In this series, we reveal what's really happened behind the castle's imposing walls. We begin with the toughest decade of the Queen's reign, the 1990s.
The royals suddenly found that they were being analysed, criticised, ridiculed.
When an unprecedented disaster threatened to destroy the castle and bring down the Queen.
5 hours on, the flames still rising from the turrets, a whole royal treasure house at risk.
We reveal how the Queen stepped in to put an end to Charles and Di's marriage.
When the Queen was going to write something as significant as that about the future of the monarchy, it could only come from the desk at Windsor.
And we discover how in the 21st century the castle has played a crucial role in reviving the popularity of Britain's royal family. In 2016, Elizabeth II was Britain's longest-serving monarch. She also turned 90 years old, making her the oldest in the nation's history. To celebrate these two great milestones, there was only one place she wanted to be: Windsor.
Windsor is at the core of all things royal. So when the Queen turned 90, the celebration focus was in Windsor Castle. That's where she was.
She went into the town outside the castle to meet her loyal subjects and was given a cake from Bake Off's Nadia Hussein. Since her childhood days 80 years earlier, Windsor Castle has been a safe haven for the Queen and played a central role in many of the key events of the nation.
When people talk about Buckingham Palace as the family home to the House of Windsor, they're wrong. Windsor Castle has been the hub of royal history down the ages. It's where the royals have met, married, been dispatched and hatched.
It's been the Queen's weekend home ever since she was crowned.
Fridays are always an exciting day at Buckingham Palace because the Queen is preparing for her weekend at Windsor, her country retreat. So after lunch on Friday, we're busy packing up all her bits and pieces, the things that she might need for the weekend.
Paul Burrell worked as the Queen's personal footman at Windsor Castle for 11 years.
It's a half-an-hour drive down the M4 from Buckingham Palace. That's what the Queen loves best. She can get into her little car, unmarked, get into the traffic, into the flow, and be in Windsor in half an hour, in the countryside, with her dogs and her horses.
And there's plenty of room for all of them at the Queen's country retreat. With an impressive 1,000 rooms, the castle covers a whopping 13 acres. From the air, the Round Tower sits in the middle of two distinct precincts. The castle's lower precinct is dominated by St. George's Chapel and houses some of the castle's 350 staff. But the Queen lives at the other end of the castle, in the upper precinct. Here, the Queen's private apartments include the royal nursery, the Queen's private study, dining room, and of course her bedchamber.
The Queen likes a very simple, traditional look, a very old English look. So the minute you go into the private apartments in Windsor Castle, you automatically feel at home because you've seen that kind of decor in many houses across Britain.
But Windsor Castle is much more than a very large, very fancy private home. It's also a state building unique in the world.
Windsor Castle has been at the core of this monarchy, this 1,000-year monarchy, since its conception.
First constructed as a fortress just after the Norman invasion, Windsor Castle has 1,000 years of royal history within its walls.
William the Conqueror built Windsor Castle, and so when you're in the castle, it's not just about Elizabeth II, it's about all the monarchs stretching right back to 1066.
From the Norman conquest, through Henry VIII, Queen Victoria, and now the Windsors, every British royal has regarded Windsor Castle as their seat of power.
Windsor Castle represents Great Britain plc. It is the place that visiting potentates want to see above all else, and that's why it's used so often as a backdrop for these great state occasions.
And the Queen's 90th birthday at Windsor was also a state occasion. It was marked by a visit from the most powerful man on the planet. But even when the President of the USA drops in, he has to respect the House rules.
When Obama came to see the Queen, she instructed American security that the helicopter should not land on the lawns at Windsor Castle, and she reminded them that this was her home and she didn't want her lovely green herbaceous border messed up.
And to emphasize how much it was their home, once the Obamas had landed, the 95-year-old Duke of Edinburgh personally drove the president up to the castle for lunch. It was a special picture designed to have impact around the world. Formal but relaxed, a popular queen totally at ease. This was an astonishing transformation, because the 90th birthday triumph came at the end of an extraordinarily dark chapter in the Windsor story. Back in 1992, royal popularity had plummeted, and Windsor Castle was gutted by fire. Friday, the 20th of November, 1992, was the Queen's 45th wedding anniversary. A day to celebrate. But the day was rapidly to become one of the worst in Windsor history. At 11:20 that morning, a work light which had been left too close to a curtain started a fire inside the Queen's private chapel at Windsor Castle. Within minutes, the 300-year-old room was ablaze. At 11:36, the alarm was raised. 5 minutes later, the Queen's press officer at Buckingham Palace received an urgent phone call.
I'm in the press office, and I got a phone call from BBC Radio Berkshire saying, "Can you confirm the fire at Windsor Castle?" And I thought, fire at Windsor Castle? What fire at Windsor Castle? I left the palace probably about 12:05. I could see from the motorway black smoke billowing, and if you could see a lot of black smoke, you know you've got a big fire.
At 12:25, 50 minutes after it started, Arbiter arrived at the castle and found 225 firemen and 39 engines battling an inferno.
There is a hive of activity going on. There's a human chain moving stuff from the Royal Library. Lots of artifacts had to be saved, hundreds of years old, and this they were doing. They were moving a carpet, an incredibly long carpet, which was almost like a snake.
In the thick of it, the Queen's second son coordinating an evacuation.
I came up to see if I could help, and yes, I could. Let's get as much as we possibly can out.
And he was very good because he was able to tell the military what to do, how to do it, and where to take it.
It also fell to Andrew to phone his mother with the bad news.
What was your mother's reaction? Her Majesty was shocked.
The Queen, who was due to arrive at Windsor about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and that's when she did arrive. And immediately she put on a long sort of barber coat, headscarf, as she always does, and was briefed by the Deputy County Fire Chief, David Harper, who gave her a sort of full background of what was happening and how they were tackling the fire.
The news wasn't good. As the Queen got her briefing, the fire had moved through the Crimson Drawing Room and St. George's Hall, two of the most important rooms in the castle, and showed no signs of slowing.
5 hours on, the flames still rising from the turrets, smoke as thick as ever, the battle for control still far from over.
By the time we got to night time, the Brunswick Tower, which is the extreme northeast corner, was like a factory chimney with smoke billowing out of the top.
The following morning, the full scale of the disaster became apparent. The fire had burned for 15 hours and needed 1.5 million gallons of water to put it out. 100 rooms had been damaged, 9 completely gutted.
St. George's Hall, for example, the damage to that was from the smoke and from water. The walls had been charred, the ceiling had completely disappeared, the roof had disappeared.
The fire at Windsor was the worst disaster in the castle's 1,000-year history. That Friday was the Queen's wedding anniversary, but her husband, Prince Philip, was away on an official tour.
The Queen was all alone and looking terribly sad, and one of Her Majesty's coachmen told me that he was grabbed by this almost irresistible urge to go up to her and to put his arm around her because she looked on the verge of tears. Suddenly it brought it all home to him that she was not just the lofty sovereign. This was a mother, a homeowner who was seeing her favourite house going up in smoke.
The fire at Windsor couldn't have come at a worse time for the Queen. 1992 had already been a dreadful year.
The Queen called 1992 her Anna Cerebralis, and she did so for a reason.
In March that year, the Duke of York separated from his wife, Sarah Ferguson. In April, Princess Anne divorced. In June, a tell-all book about Princess Diana revealed explosive details about her marriage to the Queen's eldest son, Charles, and his affair with Camilla Parker Bowles. In August, pictures of a topless Fergie having her toes sucked appeared in the tabloids. And just 2 weeks before the fire, the heir to the throne had been embarrassed in a phone-tapping scandal.
At the end of '92, Prince Charles's stock was at its lowest ebb. Not only was he seeing another woman, and that his marriage to this fairy tale princess, Princess Diana, was a sham, but also he'd been caught on tape in making these salacious remarks to Camilla Parker Bowles.
He had hit pretty much rock bottom. There were people shouting, "You should be ashamed of yourself," when he went on public engagements around the East End. I remember it quite vividly.
10 months of scandal had destroyed the reputation of the royal family and even shaken public belief in the whole idea of monarchy.
We weren't turning into a generation of Republicans all of a sudden, but people were questioning the point of the royal family like never before.
As bad as the Queen's year had already been, it was about to get worse. Just 6 hours after the fire at Windsor, the Secretary of State for National Heritage spoke to the press. In a few words, he managed to turn what had been a personal disaster for the Queen into a crisis for the monarchy.
I gave a sort of general sitrep on what I had seen and what the conditions were, and then made myself available for questions. And of course, the immediate question was, who is going to pay for it?
The responsibility for the Royal Palace is one which falls to my department, the Department of National Heritage. We will be taking the castle back to the condition at which it was.
Peter Brook's promise was committing taxpayers to stump up the estimated £40 million bill, which went down like a lead balloon.
The country was in a recession. Many services were being cut, and yet we were being asked to foot the bill for this 40 million salvaging repair job, and yet we, the public, got no particular benefit of it. It was for the Queen and her family. It was their home, but we paid for it.
Who do you think should pay for the restoration?
Not the public.
Why should we pay? Government don't pay, we pay.
There was a huge backlash amongst the general public saying, we're not going to pay for this. The royal family can pay for this.
The Queen was often at that time on the Sunday Times list, always #1 as the richest woman in the country. There's a sense of why should people in a council house in Barkingside pay for this woman's residence in Royal Berkshire?
The fire at Windsor had exposed a popular misunderstanding about what Britain's sovereign was actually worth.
They had her down as owning all the royal palaces, including the Tower of London, Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, you name it. It was the royal palace, she owned it. She owned the royal flight, the royal train, the royal yacht. She owned the royal collection, she owned the crown jewels, none of which does she own.
In reality, the Queen does not now own Windsor or any of the other royal palaces and estates. After her coronation, she, like every monarch for the last 200 years, signed a contract handing over all crown lands and buildings and their vast rental income to the government for the rest of her life. In return, she receives a large annual allowance. So legally, Windsor is the taxpayer's responsibility. But with the family's reputation at its lowest levels in a generation, the public didn't care.
I used to like them a lot at one time, but now each time you read all what's going on, you think, well, you've gone right off of them.
I think a whole lot of them should be strung up.
The Queen realised she needed to act. She needed to rebuild both Windsor and the reputation of the monarchy, and fast. Something had to change.
She doesn't like change. She finds change unsettling, like all of us. But she is prepared to embrace change, albeit slowly.
It's not the first time that public hostility has forced radical action from the royals. In 1917, the Queen's grandfather faced a similar problem.
During the First World War, anything German became extremely unpopular. This presented a difficulty, of course, for the royal family because the name of the royal house was Saxe-Coburg-Gotha.
The truth is, it was a very Germanic name, but even worse, Gotha bombers in the First World War were dropping bombs on London. So there was a sense that they had to do something to change that perception of being a Germanic royal family.
King George V very sensibly understood that he needed to change the name of the dynasty, and he very sensibly chose Windsor. They didn't choose Buckingham, and they didn't choose Sandringham or Balmoral. They chose Windsor because Windsor is quintessentially English.
75 years on, public opposition to paying for repairs to Windsor forced Elizabeth to come up with an equally radical plan.
At that stage, the
the royal institution closes ranks and has a real hard think, and what you see is a concerted effort to win the hearts and minds of the British people.
A week after the fire, the Queen called a secret meeting of key family members and trusted advisors. They formed what's known as the Way Ahead Group.
The Way Ahead Group effectively is an Uber focus group of royal household members that would discuss the way ahead. What is the strategy for the next few years? Because they were conscious that they had an image problem.
That meeting of the Way Ahead Group ended with a plan. Insisting that the taxpayers foot the bill for the fire was now out of the question. So the Queen offered to raise the money by opening up her London headquarters to paying visitors.
It was announced that the Queen was going to open Buckingham Palace up to the public to fund the repairs to Windsor Castle. It was a masterstroke in many ways. It diffused the whole situation. And of course, the backstory is that they'd been planning this anyway, but timing it just after the Windsor Castle catastrophe was a brilliant stroke.
In August 1993, just 8 months after the fire at Windsor Castle, Buckingham Palace opened its doors to paying visitors for the first time. It was a storming success. Nearly 400,000 people paid £8 a ticket to take the tour. Money was pouring into the Windsor Restoration Fund, and public hostility to the royals began to soften. But just as things were looking up, the royal recovery was once again thrown into reverse. The bitter war of words between Charles and Diana plunged to new depths and forced the Queen into yet another radical move. Two years after the devastating fire at Windsor Castle, a huge restoration program got underway. The fire had destroyed a fifth of the building, and hundreds of craftsmen were working to return it to its former glory. The castle could be repaired. In 1994, the marriage of Charles and Diana could not. They'd been separated for 2 unhappy years, and the relationship had completely broken down. Charles's popularity had sunk to a new low, with the public taking Di's side.
She doesn't need him anymore. He should give up all thought of being king. He should become like a commoner.
As heir to the throne, the Prince of Wales desperately needed to win back public respect. A primetime ITV documentary fronted by Jonathan Dimbleby gave him the perfect opportunity, and Windsor Castle the perfect backdrop.
When a documentary was first mooted for the Prince of Wales to do, it was to be around basically the Prince's Trust and his other charities. And this was really going to be a documentary about what a jolly fine fellow he is.
All had been going well with the filming, but when Dimbleby arrived at Windsor, the whole project seriously backfired.
He's in St George's Chapel, and Dimbleby is standing next to him and asked him the question about him and Camilla Parker Bowles and the breakdown of his marriage to Diana, and did he commit adultery? And he confessed that he had done.
The film was broadcast on the 29th of June 1994 and shocked even royal insiders.
My eyes came out like organ stops. I couldn't actually believe what I was seeing or what I was hearing.
By seeming to blame his affair on Diana's behaviour, Charles had upped the ante in what had been dubbed the War of the Waleses. And Diana hit back immediately in a television interview.
Diana went nuclear with her interview with Martin Bashir. She suggested that Prince Charles wasn't fit to be king, shouldn't be king, she was the Queen of Hearts. It was a damning and devastating attack, not just on Prince Charles, but also on the institution of the monarchy.
For the Queen, Diana had gone too far. By saying Charles was unfit to be king, she challenged a fundamental principle of monarchy. Succession to the throne is not decided by popular opinion.
As the Queen absorbed the full import of what was being said, she realised that she had to stop this at the pass.
Events were just rolling over them, and the monarchy was being ridiculed, traduced, and she had to seize back control.
In December 1995, in her study at Windsor, the Queen sat at her desk and began to write two of the most difficult letters she'd ever written.
The only way, really, to grasp the nettle was to order a divorce and therefore separate the House of Windsor from Princess Diana.
I think that when the Queen was going to write something as significant as that about the future of the monarchy, it only came from the desk at Windsor.
On December the 20th, 1995, the two letters were dispatched from Windsor Castle. One was sent to the Prince of Wales, and the other, via a uniformed courier, to Kensington Palace.
And I could see the Windsor Castle crest and the Windsor Castle paper. I knew exactly what it was. The letter read, after long consideration and consultation with the Prime Minister and the Archbishop of Canterbury, I think it's probably best if you divorced for the sake of the country. And signed Elizabeth R. It was a royal command from Windsor Castle.
Now, Windsor Castle is the home of many significant royal events, none more so than her decision to write this letter to protect the fabric and the integrity of the monarchy.
The Queen's intervention ended the public battle between her son and Diana. 8 months later, on August the 28th, 1996, the divorce was granted and was welcomed by the public.
Oh, it's about time. It's a complete farce. We should have done it some time ago.
I think it's sad but necessary.
With Charles's divorce, the Queen hoped that the darkest days of her reign might, finally, be behind her. But within the year, the nation and the royal family were stunned by the sudden and brutal death of Diana. That fateful Sunday, the crowds gathered in London to mourn the princess. But the Queen was not at Windsor that August weekend. She was on holiday, hidden away at Balmoral in Scotland, and she chose to stay there.
She rarely misjudges the mood of the people, but there's no question that in that week in 1997, after Diana's death, there was a misjudgment.
Our Queen should be here in London with her people. This is her nation, and they should know how all her people feel about Diana.
On September the 5th, 1997, Elizabeth did return to London.
First, I want to pay tribute to Diana myself. She was an exceptional and gifted human being.
When she came down and she spoke to people outside, comforted well-wishers, she then acted as her archetypal position demands. That is to say, she was the mother to the nation.
Being on show and being seen to care, the Queen had made that day a turning point in her fortunes. The worst years of her reign were over. There would be new tests, but none as tough as this one. She could look forward to her 50th wedding anniversary with optimism, not least because she could celebrate this one at home at Windsor. On November 20th, 1997, 5 years to the day after the fire that had destroyed it, the restoration of Windsor Castle was complete. It had cost £37 million, money the Queen had helped to find, and for Elizabeth, it was money well spent.
I know the Queen is very pleased with it. She said the other night at a party here that it was the best golden wedding anniversary present you could possibly have.
Elizabeth had restored Windsor's magnificent Edwardian interiors and had also given her home a very personal 20th century touch.
There is an Elizabeth II stamp on the restoration of Windsor Castle, a new design for the ceiling of St George's Hall, a new configuration from what was the private chapel into what is known as the Lantern Lobby now.
The reopening of Windsor Castle ended what had been a difficult 5 years for the Queen. She'd never lost her dignity, and what's more, her eldest son, Charles, could now concentrate on being a king in waiting. But the Queen's difficulties hadn't all been dealt with. She had 2 other sons, and now they were beginning to cause problems. They needed to be brought under the royal wing, and fortunately, Windsor has pretty big wings.
Windsor Castle sits within a great landscape like a kind of aircraft carrier, you know, overseeing this vast area of land.
The Windsor Castle estate is enormous. It occupies thousands of acres, including forests, golf courses, polo grounds, Ascot Racecourse, and 2 huge parks. The 5,500-acre Windsor Great Park is open to the public. But tucked away in the northeast is the Royal's own very private 650-acre estate. It's called Home Park. It's a private playground for the family where they play golf, relax in gardens, and hang out in some of the grandest homes in the country.
You have Frogmore House, you have Royal Lodge. So there are dotted throughout many other royal homes. They're not palaces, they're royal homes.
In 1997, the Queen moved her youngest son, Edward, just 6 miles down the road from the castle, into a very grand mansion called Bagshot Park.
Bagshot is this very impressive and imposing sort of Gothic house that used to belong to one of Queen Victoria's sons. It's very impressive. A little bit like something from a Hammer house, I have to say, from the outside.
Built in 1870, the huge Bagshot property has 120 rooms and 40 acres of private parkland. It's a comfortable retreat for a prince who had never really found his place in the world.
It must be really difficult being an also-ran in a royal family, because what is the role of a minor royal? In one way, you just want him to go to work. Why don't you just get yourself a job? But it's not maybe quite that easy.
And it wasn't. Throughout the 90s, Edward had tried hard to find one.
He was very keen to show that royals can earn their own living. And there was a lot of criticism at the time about them being paid for the public purse, not earning their own living. And he was very keen to change that.
But he didn't really seem to know what he actually wanted to do. First, he tried the traditional career in the services. He joined the Marines, but quit after 3 months. Then he tried to conquer London's West End and fell at the first hurdle. And eventually, he started his own TV company.
He's caught between a rock and a hard place. Call me Edward Windsor, that was what his gimmick was at that time. I'm playing Mr. Windsor. But these big television productions he was interested in making wanted to make a huge big deal of the fact that they got the Queen's son behind them. They didn't want Edward Windsor, they wanted HRH, Prince Edward. And in the end, he decided he had enough.
Edward retreated to Bagshot Park. With his newly acquired title of Earl of Wessex, a wife in Countess Sophie, and 2 young children, he could live the comfortable life of a country squire and minor royal, shielded from the public glare. Edward wasn't the only prince given refuge in the Queen's backyard.
Windsor is very much Prince Andrew's stomping ground.
Since 1987, Prince Andrew had been living in the grounds of the Windsor estate at Sunninghill Park, 5 miles from the castle. The 2-story, 12-bedroomed mansion had been a wedding present from the Queen. But after his split from Fergie and leaving the Navy, he'd found himself homeless and in search of a job.
He just came up with this idea that he should be our traveling trade ambassador, but that did not turn out to be a good fit. He had an unfortunate manner, let's put it like that, when dealing with people we wanted to do business with around the world.
I think that Prince Andrew can sometimes be rather a bore. He's not full of obvious charm.
This was a prince who expected to be treated like one when representing Britain abroad.
He wanted such a luxurious version of a visit, way in excess of what would happen for the Prime Minister or any other minister, that you kind of thought, is this really worth the effort?
Criticism of her son eventually forced him to quit and badly stung the Queen.
Andrew is the Queen's favourite son, and they're terribly close. She probably speaks as much to Andrew as to any of her children, and he's as close to her as she is to him.
She realized that Andrew needed somewhere very private to live, somewhere comfortable and close by, where he could be kept out of the public eye. In 2002, the death of her 101-year-old mother provided the Queen with the perfect solution.
Royal Lodge remains a great favourite of the Queen because it was where she went every Sunday to see her mother, and where she continues to go almost every Sunday without fail. After church, she'll drop in to see Andrew.
The huge 17th century mansion is the jewel in the crown of Windsor's private royal homes. It's also the closest. It's only 3 miles down the road from the castle. Even better for the Duke, it's very close to the castle's private golf course.
Andrew loves Windsor. Of course he loves Windsor. He plays golf. He loves the golf course, which is on the Queen's doorstep. He can play golf anytime he wants.
With his 75-year lease on Royal Lodge, the Queen's favourite son can quietly enjoy his golf at Windsor for the rest of his life. With her 2 younger sons safely packed away, the Queen could look to the future. It was time to train the next generation. And fortunately, the most important was already a Windsor resident. At the start of the new millennium, the Queen had a problem with her eldest son. Stubborn, headstrong, and seemingly unrepentant about his split with Diana, Charles had lost the affection of his subjects. But his son was hugely popular. At the time, William, second in line to the throne, was a Windsor local. As a pupil at Eton College, which is on the edge of the Windsor Castle estate, he'd spent years just a short stroll from his granny's house.
The Queen always has tea, a set tea, with a cup of tea and a biscuit in her oak drawing room. And on Sundays, she'd say to me, would you set an extra place setting? Because William's going to walk up the hill from Eton. So William would walk up the hill from school with his policeman and have a cup of tea with his granny. And I know exactly what she was doing. She was beginning to introduce him to Windsor as the seat of monarchy.
She did use those occasions to begin his education in the art of kingship, if you like. In many ways, the Queen has almost given up on Prince Charles. Charles was such an independent heir to the throne, determined to do things his own way, whereas William has proved to be more malleable, perhaps. He's certainly been more open to his grandmother's approach to monarchy, and he's likely to be much more off the chip of her block than a chip off his father's block.
Like his dad and his uncles Andrew and Edward, William chose Windsor to celebrate turning 21. And just back from volunteering in Africa, he added his own little twist.
It was an African-themed party, so everyone dressed up as elephants and giraffes and zebras and lions and gorillas. You know, I've no doubt there were several gorilla suits in there.
The 300-strong guest list included all of the most senior members of the royal family.
Prince William's 21st birthday party at Windsor Castle was a very, very big deal indeed, and was bound to attract a lot of media interest and interest from the public at large. And sprinkled amongst them almost inevitably are people who are pranksters or interferers in one way or another.
Happy birthday!
One such person was Aaron Barshak.
Aaron Barshak turns up wearing sort of a white turban and a long black beard. From there down, he was wearing a sort of a pink dress, so he was sort of like Osama bin Laden in drag. He then walks around the side wall of the castle, and he's able to get up and drop over the wall inside the castle.
Remarkably, the cross-dressing trespasser was then able to roam the castle grounds unchallenged.
CCTV from inside the castle confirms this. He walked about, he explored, he went to the kitchens, he went into this library, he went into this sitting room and so forth, and he's seen, if you like, having a good look around.
At about 11 p.m, Barshak bumped into a contractor working at the castle.
And Barshak persuades this chap that, presumably, that he's a guest who's somehow got locked out or lost from the party. So the contractor swallows this story and sort of assists Barshak.
Moments later, Barshak was within touching distance of the birthday boy.
He actually walked up to the prince, put his arm around him and planted a kiss on his cheek. Now, that's all good knockabout fun, except that we're in an age, and we were in 2003, where he could have been somebody wearing a suicide belt.
The lapse in security at Windsor Castle outraged the family and generated sympathy for the shy young prince. Over the next 2 years, the family built on the popularity of the younger Windsors, gradually erasing the memories of the dark days of the 1990s. So much so that in 2005, even the relationship that had destroyed public trust in the monarchy could be publicly celebrated.
It's extraordinary that we should witness the Prince of Wales married to Camilla Parker Bowles after all that's happened.
Just 8 years after the death of Diana, Charles married the other woman in Windsor in full public view.
As soon as she appeared as his bride in Windsor on those steps where the Queen was seen mouthing, well, that went rather well, I think people accepted it.
As the Queen turned 80 the following year, it seemed after a challenging decade she could finally look forward to a more comfortable old age, spending as much of it at Windsor as she could.
Windsor is the place the Queen considers home above all others, and in fact, as she's got older, it's the place she's retreated to more and more. She cuts short her working week at Buckingham Palace to spend more time at Windsor Castle.
Windsor Castle is a great royal stage, but for the Queen, it's the place where she grew up and raised her own family. When it was saved from destruction, so too were 80 years of her personal memories. It's no wonder that now she's in her 10th decade, she plans to spend more time in her favourite home, Windsor Castle. Windsor Castle is one of the most recognisable buildings in the world. Millions of tourists flock there each year. But Windsor is loved and cherished most by one person, Her Majesty the Queen.
Buckingham Palace is very much the office. Windsor Castle is the kind of home. It's the place that she kind of goes to in a very uncelebrated way and a bit kind of on the quiet to escape.
Elizabeth's love affair with the castle began over 80 years ago. She never expected to live there, but when she was just 10 years old, her uncle Edward made an extraordinary announcement that stunned the world. In 1936, Edward VIII became king. He had fallen desperately in love with a woman called Wallis Simpson, but she was divorced. He wanted to marry her, but according to the Constitution, it was impossible for him to be king and have a divorcee as his wife. So he was forced to choose between the crown and the woman he loved.
The dark days in December 1936, where Edward VIII had opposition to him marrying Wallis Simpson, basically played out at Windsor Castle. It's where he had his tortuous conversations with his brothers. It's where one of his brothers, the Duke of Gloucester, slapped him in the face. It's also where he made the very famous, probably the most famous royal broadcast of all time.
This is Windsor Castle. His Royal Highness Prince Edward.
But you must believe me when I tell you that I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love.
Edward VIII gave up the throne and left Windsor Castle that night for a life in exile. He had been king for just 10 months.
His leaving the castle was deeply symbolic because he was abandoning a ship, he was abandoning the country, he was abandoning his duty, he was sacrificing, in fact, what many people felt he was sacrificing duty to pleasure.
At the time, Princess Elizabeth lived with her family a few miles down the road at the Royal Lodge. Her father, Bertie, was now the next in line to the throne. Together with her mother and sister, the lives of this young family were about to change forever. Renamed King George VI, Bertie had to move into Buckingham Palace and take on the small task of ruling the largest empire in world history.
George was naturally a shy, awkward man who wanted to live a relatively normal family, domesticated life. And so it was very much a shock to him and really meant that he had to summon up all his kind of courage and very much go against his natural instinct to take the position of king.
But the stress of the abdication was nothing compared to what was coming. In 1939, just 3 years after George VI became king, Britain declared war on Nazi Germany. Where the royal family lived, especially the royal children, became a national concern.
When the war broke out, the public had no idea what was going to happen. They were completely terrified. They feared an all-out bombing raid, which perhaps would flatten the country, and the idea that these two princesses and the future heir to the throne could be injured or touched by this bomb was really terrifying.
It was decided that the heirs to the throne should be kept away from London. On the 12th of May 1940, Windsor Castle was chosen as the perfect safe house for 14-year-old Elizabeth and 9-year-old Margaret. With its magnificent views on the south side of the castle, the royal sisters moved into rooms in the Lancaster Tower.
These two princesses had this gigantic castle to explore just for themselves. For someone like Elizabeth, who was particularly interested in heritage and history and in her family's belongings, it was somewhere that she really loved to tour and look at and explore when she was a little girl. For Margaret, it was a place of fun. You could run around the corridors, you could giggle, you could dash all over the place, you could play hide and seek. For her, it was one big theme park of fun.
Entrusted with protecting the two princesses inside their castle was a Scottish governess called Marion Crawford. Nicknamed Crawfie, she was an inseparable and devoted part of the young princesses' lives.
She was indomitable. She had very high standards. She demanded loyalty, the same way as she gave loyalty. She sort of put her whole life into looking after these girls. And all she thought about was the life they had there. She used to talk about the fun they used to have playing and the huge space there was at Windsor.
The first year of the war had little impact on the lives of the princesses at Windsor or their parents in London. But in September 1940, waves of German bombers began to destroy London street by street. The official line was that the King and Queen remained at Buckingham Palace throughout the Blitz in solidarity with their people.
The king is killed in London, in London, in London. Like Mr. Jones and Mr. Brown, the king is still in London town.
But that was a lie. The true refuge of the king and queen was Windsor Castle.
The theory is that the king and queen did wonders for the morale of the people. In fact, the king wasn't still in London. The king, every evening during the worst of the Blitz, they travelled down to Windsor to spend the night.
It wasn't just the royals who were sheltered at Windsor Castle. So too were some of the nation's greatest treasures.
Because there'd been some bombing there around the Tower of London, they secretly took out all the crown jewels. These fabled gems, these sapphires, these emeralds, took them to Windsor Castle, and very secretly they used pliers, they used hammers to prise these gems out of the crowns and put them into velvet bags, then put them into hat boxes and hid them in the basement.
The House of Windsor thought the family and their jewels were safe inside their ancient fortress. But the Nazis had other ideas. Bombs would be dropped all over Britain, and Windsor would not be spared from Hitler's evil plans. Windsor Castle was the wartime home of Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret. In late 1940, towns and cities across Britain, including around Windsor, were in the German bombers' sights. The castle became the royal family's air raid shelter.
Princess Margaret said that it always seemed as though they just got to sleep when the enemy aircraft started going over. They had to be roused, dressed in their little boiler suits. They got their little cases with their bits and pieces in that they wanted. And then they would make the trek way, way down into the cellars, the basements of the tower in which they lived.
The best place to shelter from Windsor Castle was right in the depths, in the dungeons, and historically that's where their ancestors had imprisoned all the baddies, all the traitors, everyone when they wanted out of the way. So they'd been a very unhappy place.
Deep in the dungeons, the young girls were surrounded by the ghosts of Windsor Castle's grim past. Some of these were the innocent victims of the vicious King John, the great-great-grandson of William the Conqueror. He inherited the castle in 1199 and loved nothing more than filling its dungeons with his enemies.
King John was a very, very nasty piece of work. He really was a genuine rotter. He falls out with one of his great men, William de Brios, in 1208, and he catches up with the Brios family. John gets hold of his wife and his eldest son, and those two prisoners he locks up and starves to death. The mother was in her son's arms, and she, in desperation, had gnawed at his cheeks because she was starving to death.
The Blitz was just one part of Hitler's evil master plan for Britain. After the bombing, he planned to invade the country and take it by force. But Windsor Castle had a top-secret escape route for Elizabeth and Margaret.
If the Germans, for example, if the enemy had managed to get in, or there was a danger that they were approaching the castle in that way, and the normal avenues of escape had been sealed off, there is a secret exit from the dungeons, which is still there, which takes you out near the River Thames, and they could have been spirited away that way.
At the height of the Blitz in October 1940, Britain was teetering on the brink of defeat. Prime Minister Winston Churchill asked the king to let his daughter make a crucial contribution to the war effort. He wanted the 14-year-old Princess Elizabeth to make her very first radio broadcast to millions of people around the world. It would be recorded from Windsor Castle.
There were weeks and weeks of preparations with her governors. I mean, she practiced breathing. It wasn't just done like she read a script. It was very, very carefully rehearsed. And she was very nervous. She read it several times to her parents before she actually completed the broadcast.
The speech was written to offer comfort to homesick young evacuees sent overseas. But there was another, more important motive. Britain was desperate for an ally, and Churchill believed that the young Elizabeth could charm America into declaring war on the Nazis.
The speech was recorded in one of the rooms in Windsor Castle because I think they wanted it to be as sort of homely as possible.
This is the first time the public had heard the young princess's voice. Elizabeth needed to summon all her weeks of practice to remain calm and composed.
All of us children who are still at home think continually of our friends and relations who have gone overseas, who have traveled thousands of miles to find a wartime home and a kindly welcome in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and the United States of America.
It was designed to do what Churchill was desperate to do, which was to gain the sympathy and, with any luck, the alliance of the United States. But it was also designed to show that they were good for morale.
My sister is by my side, and we are both going to say good night to you. Come on, Margaret. Good night, children. Good night, and good luck to you all.
You can tell in that speech, some of the way she pronounces her words, that that's actually how she always spoke. And I love the fact that the Americans picked up the phrase, "Come on, Margaret," and used it as a sort of slang phrase. Hey, come on, Margaret.
The Windsor speech was a massive success. It was front-page news, and the skeptical American public were won over by the young princess. Windsor Castle itself became both a symbol of defiance and a beacon of hope against a superior enemy.
Windsor became a sort of centre for resistance. I mean, they used Windsor very, very well. They ploughed up Windsor Park and turned it over to vegetables. The Queen distributed a lot of the furniture from Windsor Castle to people who'd been bombed out. There was a huge effort to show that royalty was doing its bit.
In the chaos of World War II, the princesses tried to lead a normal life at Windsor. Mixing with local children helped keep their feet on the ground. They were both active members of the Sea Cadets and the Girl Guides.
Every Thursday afternoon from 2 till 4, they worked for their guide's cooking badge, making cakes, making stews, learning how to cook in the kitchens of Windsor Castle, where their ancestors would never have gone. No royal would ever go anywhere near the kitchens. That was the servants. You wouldn't touch them. And yet here's Elizabeth, the future queen, in the royal kitchens.
Surprisingly, Elizabeth's wartime experiences at Windsor Castle are some of the happiest in her long life. Thanks, in part, to the arrival of a tall and handsome young man as a guest at Christmas 1943. Prince Philip was a 22-year-old war hero who changed the destinies of both the country and the 17-year-old princess forever. A German royal in exile, he was cash-strapped and homeless.
The castle is fantastic, it's huge, it's historic. He never really had a family home. And Philip is a person who doesn't have much money, and there's some rather unkind mockery made of him when he comes to visit the castle, because when his bag is unpacked by the valets, they realise he's only got one pair of pyjamas. He just really hasn't got very much money.
His own family life had been completely sort of blown apart. His mother had a very bad nervous breakdown and was forcibly taken off to a sanatorium. His father also more or less abandoned the family as well.
Despite this, Elizabeth had her eye on the young man, and she had the perfect opportunity to impress. The highlight of Windsor's wartime Christmases was the annual pantomime, performed in one of the castle's grandest spaces.
Waterloo Chamber at Windsor Castle is huge. It has a massive ceiling which is overlit by a dome with windows in it to let the light in. The room is just surrounded by portraits of the Duke of Wellington and the generals who fought at the Battle of Waterloo. So that's a very famous room.
The Waterloo Chamber was converted into a theatre fit for royalty every Christmas. And in the 1943 panto, Elizabeth demanded the starring role in Aladdin, with Margaret supporting her big sister. Philip was going to be in the audience. Elizabeth was hoping to sweep him off his feet.
Here's Elizabeth on stage. She's a lead role, she's giving all the lines, she's giving them marvellously. It's a completely different view of Elizabeth and of her figure. She's 17 and she looks absolutely fantastic in these tights and in these sort of short shorts.
According to the story, Aladdin is given 3 wishes. Princess Elizabeth was granted 1. Sat in the front row, the prince was charmed by her performance.
He was seen to laugh very loudly at all the bad jokes, and Princess Elizabeth, meanwhile, was more animated than anyone had ever seen her. The evident frisson between them seemed to continue at Windsor Castle.
For Prince Philip, seeing the royal family and Elizabeth at Christmas really transformed his view of them. That was everything he'd ever wanted. A close family who talked to each other, played cards, played charades. These simple pleasures that he hadn't had because his family life had been so very unhappy. So going to Windsor was his chance to experience that family life.
Over Christmas, Philip and Elizabeth's relationship went into overdrive. When the King and Queen realized just how close the young couple had become, they were both shocked and appalled.
When Elizabeth fell in love with Philip, and she really did, I mean, she fell head over heels in love with this very handsome man. But it was sort of ironic that Philip would have been sort of perfect by the standards of the 1930s, but now things had changed. The fact that he came from a German background meant that he was far less desirable.
Any connection with Hitler's Germany was a public relations disaster. 3 of Philip's 4 sisters had married prominent Nazis. One of his nephews was even named Karl Adolf in honor of the Führer. But Princess Elizabeth was madly and blindly in love.
The king realizes that no matter how much he distrusts Philip, no matter how much he doesn't like him, if he denies Elizabeth her chance to marry him, she will never forgive him. And so he has to do it. He has to let her marry him.
King George VI didn't have the heart to end the relationship. Instead, he told the young couple that they had to keep it secret until after the war. But when the war in Europe ended in May 1945, Windsor Castle had a much more damaging problem to deal with. George had been tipped off that his brother, the exiled King Edward VIII, may have committed treason by making shady deals with the Nazis. If so, it was a dark secret that must be hidden at all costs. Windsor Castle had survived World War II totally unscathed. It had safely protected the heir to the throne for 5 long years. But outside its walls, a royal crisis was brewing that threatened to destroy the House of Windsor. There were rumors that the exiled King Edward VIII, now the Duke of Windsor, may have committed treason.
What George VI was terrified about was the public finding out about his older brother being basically a neo-Nazi. Here's a man who contacted the Nazis during the war, has little interest in Britain's survival. So, in a way, it would be very embarrassing for the Duke, but also crippling for the royal family and for the monarchy.
The royal family were led to believe that damning documents existed in post-war Germany. It was thought they contained evidence that if Hitler conquered Britain, Edward wanted to retake the throne with his wife, Wallis Simpson. A daring plan was hatched to recover the evidence before the press discovered it and stash it inside Windsor Castle.
The royal family were anxious to make sure that any correspondence that had taken place between the Duke and the Nazi regime should be under wraps. And so, it appears, courtiers from Windsor Castle were sent across to Germany to bring back various manuscripts which have disappeared.
In the months after the war, the royal courtiers made several trips to Germany and brought a trove of material back to Windsor Castle. It's unknown if the courtiers found what they wanted, because everything they brought back was locked away.
We do not know what happened, and we probably won't know what happened for hundreds of years, or 100 years at any rate.
The documents are part of a vast cache that the royal family keep under lock and key in the Round Tower. It's called the Royal Archives. It's where the House of Windsor keeps all its most intimate secrets.
Windsor, of course, is a repository for secrets. There are documents and letters there that I think probably every historian would give their eye teeth for.
The royal family ruthlessly control who can access the archives and what exactly they're allowed to see, including Edward VIII's letters. The secret hoard of personal correspondence stretches back 250 years. For royal biographers, it's an Aladdin's cave.
The first time I went to the Royal Archives, I found it frightfully difficult to get into because, first of all, you have to go to the Round Tower and you go up a lot of steps. And the security is intense. You aren't even allowed to go to the loo by yourself. Somebody accompanies you and stands outside the door. It is, after all, their private letters. One mustn't forget that. Any family has reservations about who sees all the most intimate diaries and letters.
The Royal Archives contain lots of private royal things, but they also contain lots of material that ought to be in the public domain. Royalty is controlling the past, and as we know, those who control the past have a great interest in controlling the future.
But they're not the only secrets hidden at Windsor. The castle is the royal family's giant safe, home to a vast and private collection of artwork. It's called the Royal Collection, one of the finest, largest, and most valuable hoards of art and jewellery in the world.
Windsor Castle is a huge treasure chest. It's a vast cornucopia of art objects. Much of it is imperial loot. Every time a victorious general conquered some outpost of empire, he would send back the prized jewels.
Almost every one of the castle's 1,000 rooms is crammed with priceless objects, while its shelves are stuffed full of ancient manuscripts and first editions.
You've got Renoirs and Manets and Monets. It's extraordinary, it's quite extraordinary. I saw a couple of Canalettos there, and I thought, I wonder if they're real. And I thought, silly me, of course they're real, there's nothing fake here.
Every artist you've ever heard of is represented in Windsor Castle. There must be something like 2 million separate objects, of which the public have seen a tiny, tiny fraction. This vast collection of goodies, it's worth, estimates vary, but I mean, it's worth perhaps 10 billion, perhaps 50 billion.
The collection is truly priceless. In 1947, it grew somewhat bigger. That year, despite doubts from her parents, Elizabeth married Philip on the 20th of November. The public were overjoyed.
Wedding gifts were sent to Philip and Elizabeth from all over the world, and they were displayed on show, and there were queues of people trying to see them. They weren't resentful of this big wedding, they were actually excited about it, and very hopeful that this meant the end of the dark days and the beginning of a marvellous future for Britain.
That future soon began to take shape in 1948, when Princess Elizabeth gave birth to Charles. Anne followed 2 years later. Apart from rare appearances in front of the cameras, raising children at Windsor has always been a private affair. But in 1950, the world got a unique insight of behind-the-scenes life inside the castle. Devoted to the royal family, the Scottish governess, Marion Crawford, had looked after Elizabeth and Margaret for 17 years. Now she would find out what happens if you reveal Windsor secrets.
Normally, a governess would expect to be the governess to the next set of children, but that doesn't really happen. And instead, she's given a grace and favour cottage. She's given her own cottage to live in. And instead, what she does is she's rather naive. She thinks, I know, I'll write a book.
Crawford wrote an account about her life with the royals and seemed to have no idea she was crossing a line. Called The Little Princesses, its pages are full of memories like tea parties with the girls inside the castle, sheltering in the dungeons, and the royal pantos. At the time, it was totally unprecedented.
Something that people can pick up, they can read, and they can get an understanding of what happens in the ordinary parts of the days with the royal family. You know, when they're not out on state visits, what they do at home, how they are as a family.
The extremely private lives of Elizabeth and Margaret, as well as the King and Queen themselves, were now on full public display in Crawford's book. In royalty-obsessed America, it became a bestseller, and Crawford became a very rich woman.
There is this amazing advert at the time for The Little Princesses in an American newspaper, and it says, "Come into our castle, come into our castle." And they've got this really brilliant picture of Windsor Castle, so they're saying, if you read this book, you will get privileged access into Windsor Castle.
But The Little Princesses also revealed that the King and Queen were old-fashioned and often absent parents. It was an embarrassing and deeply personal leak of royal secrets that could not go unpunished. Marion Crawford was shut out of royal circles and expelled from Windsor.
It became a tragedy. Just because there was a lady who had done everything with the finest intentions. There is no salacious gossip. It is all just straight reporting, and reporting with love. But she then had to live her life as the outcast.
Crawford never saw the princesses again. Banished from castle life, her treatment was intended to prevent anyone else from selling out the royal family.
She held them in very high esteem. I found it absolutely amazing that she never said a bad word about them, and I was never allowed to say a bad word. I've always wanted to meet the Queen and explain to her how Crawford felt.
But that wasn't the end of the family's trouble with the servants of Windsor Castle. In the 1950s, it was the King's Equerry, Group Captain Peter Townsend, who became an even bigger problem for the royals. His presence at Windsor set in train a scandal that ruptured the family and set sister against sister.
Peter Townsend, who was a very distinguished Battle of Britain fighter pilot, He was highly decorated. He was very much a firm favourite and a firm fixture within the royal family and within the royal household.
Townsend and his young family had been a fixture at Windsor since 1945, when he was given an exclusive royal residence, Adelaide Cottage, in the grounds of the castle.
Adelaide Cottage is a beautiful Grace and Favour home. It's very pretty. Parts of it look a little bit like a Swiss cottage, I suppose, a very large Swiss cottage, because it has 5 or 6 bedrooms and very, very nice reception rooms, but inside it feels cosy.
This handsome new arrival at Windsor made an instant impact on one impressionable member of the family. Princess Margaret began to make excuses to visit Townsend at Adelaide Cottage, just a stone's throw from the castle.
He was extremely good looking, very, very charming, great company. And Princess Margaret, it was felt like a lot of girls that she'd got a crush on him.
He was 16 years older than the young princess, but Margaret didn't care. Windsor was her private playground, and Townsend was a willing participant in their flirtation.
Windsor was where he and Margaret could be free. No one was looking at them. No one was watching them or photographing them. They went out walking together. They enjoyed the outside together. They could really spend time together. So to him, Windsor's this idyllic place that developed their relationship in privacy.
In the secure sanctuary of Windsor, Peter and Margaret's friendship developed into a full-blown affair. But a dark cloud would threaten this charmed and secret world. King George VI's health was rapidly deteriorating. In June 1951, he escaped to Windsor in the hope the country air might help his recovery.
Windsor, once again, was this kind of place of refuge where he recuperated, and it was hoped would actually fully get better. It did seem like he turned the corner and was on a road to recovery.
But it was only temporary. As a lifelong smoker, George was terminally ill with cancer. An emergency operation to remove a lung couldn't save him. He died suddenly on the 6th of February 1952, aged just 56. His tragic death triggered huge changes to the lives of his daughters. One became queen, the other caused a scandal. On the 15th of February 1952, the coffin of King George VI was brought to St. George's Chapel in the heart of Windsor Castle. He had shouldered the burden of the crown through the dark days of the war. Now, aged just 25, his daughter was on the throne. Elizabeth was the youngest monarch since Queen Victoria. She now had to lead not only a shocked nation, but her grief-stricken family.
The family was fractured. Elizabeth became queen. She was a wife, she was a mother. She's got all the responsibility of sovereignty on her shoulders. Her mother, widowed, was totally in a dark world of grief. So you've got Margaret on her own, feeling lost and pretty vulnerable in many ways.
Utterly distraught, Princess Margaret turned to the man who was secretly her lover, Group Captain Peter Townsend.
The relationship between Margaret and Peter really accelerates, it really hits a second level. And Peter Townsend has divorced his wife and he decides he wants to marry Princess Margaret.
In early 1953, Townsend and Margaret met up in one of the most private and opulent rooms in the castle, the Crimson Drawing Room.
It's named after the crimson silk damask wallpaper and curtains which hang in that room. And famously, two very important portraits of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, in their coronation robes are either side the fireplace.
Free to marry again and away from prying eyes, Peter proposed to the 22-year-old princess. They decided to keep their engagement under wraps, but this was one secret that couldn't be hidden away inside Windsor Castle. The Queen's coronation at Westminster Abbey on the 2nd of June 1953 was the most spectacular display of royal power ever caught on camera. The eyes of the world and the press were watching, hungry for any royal gossip.
It's all gone brilliantly. Elizabeth's got the crown on her head, it's all great. But then Margaret is in the porch of Westminster Abbey, and there's Peter Townsend. She's talking to him, he's in front of her, no problem with that. But then she sort of flicks some dust off his collar. And that seems an incredibly intimate move. And unfortunately, because the world's press is there, they realise it's a romantic relationship.
One sharp-eyed reporter blew the affair wide open. The handsome divorcee and the beautiful princess was a huge story.
It is an incredible shock to Margaret and Peter that when their relationship is no longer this private thing at Windsor, but this huge public affair. Everything that they had in Windsor is pretty much shattered. The innocence that they had is shattered. They suddenly realise that their marriage cannot be a private thing. Margaret's a public figure, and so it has to be a public cause for concern.
Margaret's engagement suddenly became her sister's most difficult challenge. If Margaret married a divorcee, she would have to live abroad, lose her court status, and come off the royal payroll. With echoes of the abdication crisis in 1936, Queen Elizabeth had to make her see sense.
On a personal level, the Queen was delighted that her sister had found love. But the Queen also is a very uncomplicated woman. She really couldn't understand her sister. She couldn't understand why Margaret had to complicate her life by becoming involved with a married man.
Elizabeth made the first big decision of her reign. She put duty first and separated the couple. 6 weeks after the coronation, Peter Townsend had to leave Adelaide Cottage and was sent to work abroad for 2 years. When he returned, the separation from Windsor had done its job. Margaret ended the engagement, and their famous romance was over.
She did say to me on one occasion, "How do you know after 2 years of being apart if you still want to marry somebody?" My own feeling is that whilst they still had enormous affection for one another, they'd actually fallen out of love.
Through the betrayals and the scandals of those closest to her, Queen Elizabeth learned harsh lessons the hard way. Duty always came before pleasure. For the rest of her life, she would keep her own secrets close to her chest and safe inside her favorite home and fortress, Windsor Castle. Next time, through the formal 50s and the less than formal 60s, we discover the secrets of the Queen Mother's infamous parties.
She was never known to be drunk, but she was never ever completely sober either.
Why the Queen first let the TV cameras into the castle.
People still talk to this day about the sight of Prince Philip flipping burgers on a barbecue.
And how a young Camilla burst onto the Windsor scene.
She said to him, "Sir, my great-great-grandmother, Alice Capel, was your great-great-grandfather, Edward VII's mistress."
Using the latest technology, we get the clearest picture yet of the world's most famous shipwreck. Titanic draining the wreck is tomorrow at 9. Next tonight, we're back with the House of Windsor, revealing new scandals at the palace.